The night was cold and filled with promises. Kiana, in her impeccable white dress, carried more than just the memories of her recital. She brought with her the pride of her first solo performance at the Madison Concert Hall. Every note she played, every applause she received, still resonated in her mind. But as the rain grew heavier, her perfect night was about to transform into something unimaginable. On the other side of the city, inside a patrol car, Officer Damen Price watched the streets, his eyes heavy with fatigue. After an exhausting shift, all he wanted was for the night to end, until he saw Kiana walking alone down Maple Street. What he saw wasn't a young musician heading home. He reduced her to a suspect, a face that, in his mind, didn't belong in that neighborhood. Without hesitation, Price started the engine, steering the car toward her. The sound of the tires cutting through water caught Kiana's attention, but she didn't stop. The memory of her performance and the joy she carried were now overshadowed by the growing tension with each step. "Stop right there." Price's voice echoed through the street. The girl hesitated, frozen in place. He stepped out of the car, moving quickly, his imposing figure highlighted under the yellow glow of the streetlights. "What are you doing here so late?" The question wasn't out of curiosity. It was an accusation. Kiana tried to explain herself. She spoke about the recital, about the program she still held in her hands. But her arguments fell on deaf ears. Price didn't see a dedicated young woman returning from an important night. He only saw her braids and the context he had invented for her in his mind. When he ordered her to empty her bag, Kiana hesitated. Every piece of sheet music inside was precious, a part of her story. But Price wouldn't budge. With every response she gave, his tone grew more aggressive. He suggested that her braids indicated gang affiliation. He turned something personal, crafted by her father's careful hands, into a symbol of danger. As the barber hesitated, tools trembling in his hands, Price crossed his arms, satisfied. At that moment, he believed he was in control. What he didn't yet know was that every move he made was being documented, by witnesses, by cameras, by history itself. The power he thought he wielded was about to turn against him in ways he could never foresee. And Kiana, even as she felt her identity stripped away in strands, knew her voice would not be silenced. Not that night. Not as long as someone was willing to listen. The chair felt like a throne of humiliation. But Kiana refused to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her break. Sitting there, her eyes locked onto Price's reflection in the small mirror on the wall. The officer, so confident moments earlier, quickly looked away, unable to face the dignity she radiated even in such a cruel moment. The barber began his work, his hands visibly shaking. Each snip seemed louder than any other sound in the room. It was as if every braid that fell onto Kiana's lap carried a piece of her identity, her story. Yet, she remained motionless. The tears threatened to fall but stayed trapped in her eyes, reflecting the harsh light of the room. As her hair disappeared in uneven chunks, Price's discomfort grew. He muttered hollow apologies, referencing regulations no one believed. The barber hesitated with each movement, clearly ashamed but forced to continue under the officer's watchful eyes. When the last braid was cut, Kiana picked it up from the floor with care, holding it as if it were a lost treasure. It wasn't just hair. It was a symbol of who she was, of the love and dedication her father had put into braiding it that very morning. The silence that fell over the room was thick, almost unbearable. Then the tension shattered. The door burst open, and Captain Monroe entered, radiating authority. His eyes swept the scene, taking in every detail. Kiana's hastily chopped hair, the braids in her lap, Price's uncomfortable stance. What he saw was more than an abuse of power. It was a violation, an act of dehumanization. What the hell is going on here? Monroe's voice reverberated, heavy with outrage. Price tried to stammer a justification, but Monroe silenced him with a sharp gesture. Monroe grabbed the officer by the arm and dragged him out, their footsteps echoing down the hallway. The door to Monroe's office slammed shut, rattling the blinds. Muffled yelling followed, but the specifics didn't matter. The balance of power had begun to shift. Back in the detention room, Kiana sat tall as everyone around her avoided her gaze. The young woman clutched her braids tightly, defying the fate thrust upon her. She knew this moment wouldn't be the end. What had started as a night of humiliation was transforming into something greater. A movement, a fight for justice, beginning right there in that cold room. And though Price didn't know it yet, his actions were about to change everything. The door to Monroe's office slammed shut, sealing Price inside the storm he wasn't prepared for. "Sit down," the captain ordered, his voice cold but simmering with restrained fury. Price hesitated, opening his mouth to defend himself, but Monroe raised his hand abruptly. Not a word. Monroe grabbed a thick file from his desk and slammed it down hard, scattering papers everywhere. Among them, a photograph landed in front of Price, catching his attention. A serious-looking man, formally dressed, clearly a high-level professional. "Do you know who this is?" Monroe asked, his words heavy as lead. Price leaned in to get a closer look, squinting at the image. "No, sir," he replied, his voice trembling slightly. Monroe leaned forward, his eyes locked on Price's. "This is federal investigator Marcus Bennett," he announced, his tone sharp as a blade. "And the girl you humiliated today? The one you forced to cut her hair? That's his daughter, Kiana." The weight of those words hit Price like a punch to the gut. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, feeling the gravity of what he'd just heard. Before he could form an excuse, Monroe continued, his voice rising. "Do you know what this means? Bennett has been undercover for 3 years. 3 years of work to dismantle Grayson's network. And now, thanks to your stupidity, all of that could be at risk. Sir, I was just following protocol." Price tried to justify, his voice weakened by evident guilt. Monroe's laugh was cold, almost cruel. "Protocol? Show me where in the protocol it says you can cut a minor's hair without cause or consent. You can't, because it doesn't exist. Show me where it's written that walking home after a piano recital is a crime." As Price stood in silence, visibly shaken, Monroe turned toward the window, where he had a clear view of the building's entrance. Outside, Kiana was being escorted by another officer who treated her with care. Her posture was firm, her head held high, but her eyes glowed with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. It was the gaze of someone who hadn't been defeated, despite all she had endured. Monroe turned back to Price, crossing his arms. "If you think this is going to go unnoticed, you're sorely mistaken. Bennett is already aware of what happened, and let me warn you, whatever he does to you will be far worse than anything I could ever impose." In the heavy silence that followed, Price realized that his career, and perhaps his very life, had just changed forever. Outside, Kiana walked forward, carrying not just the pain of the night, but also the certainty that her voice, along with her father's, would bring justice to this moment of cruelty. What had begun as an abuse of power was about to transform into a lesson that would resonate far beyond that room. The office felt smaller as Monroe spread the files across the desk. Surveillance photos, confidential documents, and detailed diagrams formed a grim mosaic of the operation Marcus Bennett had meticulously built over 3 years. "This operation goes far beyond anything you can imagine," Monroe said, his voice laced with frustration. "Bennett infiltrated one of the largest criminal networks in this city. A single rumor about his daughter being humiliated by a cop could ruin everything. Do you understand what's at stake?" Price swallowed hard, feeling his throat tighten. "I didn't know," he murmured. "And that's precisely the problem," Monroe shot back, leaning toward him. "You didn't know, and yet you acted. Now we're dealing with the fallout. Bennett is on his way here, and until he arrives, you're not leaving the station." As Monroe stepped away, Price glanced again at Marcus Bennett's photo. The determined look in the investigator's eyes seemed to pierce through him, as if the man in the picture could see right through all the excuses Price was struggling to form. Later, in the break room, Price sat alone, clutching a coffee cup that had long since gone cold. He stared into the liquid, lost in thought. His conviction, once so solid, was crumbling. For the first time, he began to question himself. The fear of what lay ahead weighed heavier than the coffee in his hands. Elsewhere in the station, the sound of polished shoes echoed down the hallway, marking Marcus Bennett's arrival. His presence was impossible to ignore. The immaculate suit, the rigid posture, the calculated calm in every step. He seemed out of place in the gritty surroundings, yet he commanded the space as if it were his own. Monroe met Bennett at the office door, hurriedly trying to explain what had happened, his voice low and anxious. But Bennett raised a hand, cutting him off with a simple, firm gesture. "I'd like to speak with Officer Price alone," he said, his voice calm but brimming with authority. Without question, Monroe stepped aside, letting Marcus take control. Inside the office, the tension was palpable. Bennett sat down quietly, adjusting the chair before fixing his gaze on Price. The officer seemed to shrink under that stare, uncomfortable but still attempting to maintain some semblance of authority. "Officer Price," Marcus began, his voice low and controlled, "do you understand what your actions have cost tonight?" Price tried to respond, but his words were weak. "Sir, I was just following—" "3 years," Marcus interrupted, his voice slicing through the air like a blade. 3 years of careful work, countless lives at risk, an operation that could change everything. All of it jeopardized because you couldn't see past your own biases. Bennett leaned forward, closing the distance between them, his eyes locked onto Price's. "Let me be direct. You have 2 options. Option 1. I make this incident public. Every detail, every moment of what you did to my daughter will be headline news. Your career will end, not quietly, but in disgrace." Price's face turned pale, the weight of Marcus's words crushing any resistance he might have had. "Option 2, Bennett continued, his tone unwavering. "You help me salvage this operation. You follow my orders and work to fix what you've destroyed." Bennett leaned in closer, his expression hardening. "Understand, this isn't about you. I'm not here to save your reputation. This is bigger than you or me. It's about innocent lives and a mission that must be completed." Price attempted to speak, but Bennett silenced him with a single look, cold, resolute, and unyielding. "You have until morning to decide. Choose wisely, because your future, Officer Price, is hanging by a thread." With those words, Marcus stood, adjusted his suit, and left the room, leaving Price alone with the weight of his decisions. Whatever choice he made wouldn't just define his life, but also determine the fate of an operation that could change everything. The dawn seemed powerless against the dense fog enveloping the small roadside diner. Price entered hesitantly, finding Marcus already seated at a corner table. Marcus's coffee emitted a faint wisp of steam, while Price's, untouched, sat cooling. The tension between them was almost palpable. "Nathaniel Grayson," Marcus began, sliding a photo across the table. "He runs one of the largest criminal networks on the East Coast, but you'd never suspect it by looking at him." Price picked up the photo, examining the image of an elegant man in his 50s. His friendly smile and impeccable suit starkly contrasted with the idea of a crime boss. "He looks more like a CEO than a criminal," Price muttered. "Exactly," Marcus said, his gaze unwavering. "That's precisely what he wants everyone to think. He's got judges in his pocket, cops on his payroll, and even some politicians. That makes him nearly untouchable." Price adjusted his shirt collar, already feeling the weight of what was to come. "And what do you expect me to do?" "You're going undercover," Marcus replied bluntly. "A cop with a racial incident on his record? Grayson will think you're bitter enough to take a little extra cash. That vulnerability is exactly what he looks for." Marcus leaned closer, his voice dropping. "But watch out for Victor Steele, Grayson's right-hand man. He's paranoid, ruthless, and trusts no one. He'll be watching your every move, every word, every expression. The air around Price grew heavier as Marcus outlined the details of the operation. Human trafficking, drugs, weapons. The scope of Grayson's activities was almost unimaginable. I don't know if I can do this, Price admitted, his voice shaky. You don't have a choice anymore, Marcus said, sliding a disposable phone across the table. The safety of my daughter and countless others depends on it. Your instructions are programmed into the phone. Memorize them and destroy it. The small phone felt heavier than any weapon Price had ever held. Slipping it into his pocket, he rose on unsteady legs and walked out, the morning fog swallowing his figure. At precisely 8 a.m., Price arrived at the designated location. The air was dense and heavy, with shadows stretching under the flickering streetlights. From the darkness emerged Victor Steele. His presence was intimidating, his eyes scrutinizing Price's every move. Without preamble, Victor handed him a package wrapped in brown paper. "Take this to 1458 Harbor Street," he ordered. "Don't stop, don't open it, don't talk to anyone." Price nodded, tucking the package into his jacket. Sweat trickled down his neck as he got into the car and drove through the city's still sleeping streets. It didn't take long for him to realize he was being followed. 2 cars kept their distance but mirrored his every turn. When he reached the destination, a group of men stood in the alley. Their stares were piercing, and one of them reached inside his jacket. Price maintained his composure, adjusting his speed without reacting. After a tense moment, the man backed off, and Price continued, his heart pounding. At the drop-off point, Victor was already waiting, watching Price's every move with unnerving intensity. As Price handed over the package, he stood firm, masking his inner tension. After a long pause, Victor finally spoke. "Not bad. You kept your cool with Rodriguez's guys. Not everyone can pull that off without flinching." "Just doing my job," Price replied, hiding the anxiety bubbling beneath the surface. Later, in a secure location, Price contacted Marcus. "The package was delivered," he reported. "There was a tense moment with some gang members, but I managed to avoid trouble." "Good work," Marcus responded. "But don't let your guard down. Victor's testing you, and these tests are only going to get harder. The stakes are rising." Price hung up, feeling the growing weight of the mission. He knew that from this point on, every decision would be a matter of life and death, not just for him, but for everyone under the shadow of Grayson's network. The silence inside the warehouse was broken only by the faint hum of distant machinery. Price moved cautiously, his boots lightly echoing against the concrete floor as he searched for a strategic vantage point. In the distance, he spotted Victor Steele and 3 other men gathered around a stack of crates. Their voices were muffled, but Price moved closer, just enough to catch fragments of their conversation. "Bennett and his daughter are becoming a problem," declared Victor, his voice sharp as ice. "Grayson wants them both eliminated, without a trace." Price's heart raced, but he kept a neutral expression. With a discreet movement, he activated the small recording device hidden in his pocket. Every word was evidence that could alter the course of the operation. "She regularly plays at the music center." One of the men commented casually, as if discussing the weather. "An easy target." Victor nodded, his expression unyielding. "Take care of it. Make it look like an accident. Nothing should trace back to us." When the conversation ended, Price tried to slip away unnoticed. But Victor was like a predator, his sharp eyes catching any hint of hesitation. He approached Price, scrutinizing him with a gaze that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone. "You're awfully quiet tonight," Victor said, his voice laced with suspicion. "Having second thoughts about our arrangement." Price remained calm, though sweat was starting to run down his neck. "Just tired," he replied in a controlled tone. Long shift at the precinct. Victor remained silent for what felt like an eternity before finally stepping back. "We'll see," he muttered before walking away, still skeptical. As soon as he had the chance, Price left the warehouse and headed to a secure location. His hands trembled as he dialed Marcus's number. When the investigator's calm but tense voice answered, Price was direct. "They're planning to target you and Kiana," he whispered. "Victor discussed it just now. I recorded everything." On the other end of the line, Marcus quickly processed the information. "Bring me that recording immediately. I'll move Kiana to a safe location right now. Don't waste any time." At Marcus's hideout, the atmosphere buzzed with energy as agents studied maps and prepared their gear. Photos of the warehouse were spread across the table, and Marcus directed the team with military precision. Price entered, still catching his breath, clutching the recording as if it were the only shield against the impending chaos. "The warehouse gives us an advantage," Marcus explained, pointing to the detailed layout on the map. "We have multiple entry points and clear sightlines for our snipers. Price, you'll lead Grayson through the east entrance at 9 p.m. Price swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the mission. "And Victor? What if he shows up?" Marcus looked at him directly, his expression unreadable. "Team 2 will handle Victor and any other associates. Your priority is Grayson." "Understood." Price nodded, but the tension on his face was unmistakable. That night, the warehouse loomed like a sleeping giant in the darkness. The faint glow of streetlights cast distorted shadows on the metal walls. Price entered through the east side, his footsteps echoing as his mind raced with thoughts. The package he carried, the mission he had accepted, it all felt like too high a gamble. Inside, Victor and his men gathered near a stack of crates. Price kept moving, pretending to check his phone, while catching snippets of their conversation. "We're ready," Victor said in a deadly tone. "Grayson wants answers by tomorrow." But this time, Price wasn't alone. Agents positioned around the warehouse awaited the signal. Outside, Marcus gave final orders, monitoring the operation. What had begun as an infiltration now escalated into a direct confrontation. The line between survival and justice had never seemed so thin. When the clock struck 9 p.m., everything was about to change. The sunset stretched shadows across the warehouse, painting the parking lot in golden and dark hues. Price arrived at the designated time, his heart pounding as he spotted Grayson's black SUV parked in the lot. He swallowed hard as he watched the man step out of the vehicle, immaculate in his expensive suit, but with eyes that seemed to analyze every detail. "Officer Price," Grayson greeted in a smooth tone, though his rigid posture betrayed his distrust. "Quite an isolated place for a conversation, wouldn't you say?" "Privacy is essential for what we need to discuss," Price replied, forcing his voice to remain steady. He led Grayson toward the warehouse entrance, carefully following the plan Marcus had laid out. Inside the vast warehouse, footsteps echoed like drums in an empty hall. Grayson tense, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the space. "Something doesn't feel right," he murmured, his voice low and laced with suspicion. Before Price could react, the calm shattered in an instant. Federal agents burst in through every entrance, their voices ringing out. "FBI, don't move!" Amid the chaos, Marcus emerged, his stance commanding as he led the team. Grayson's expression shifted from confusion to fury, but he had no time to act. From the shadows, Victor appeared, gun in hand, aiming directly at Marcus. Time seemed to slow as Price, without thinking, lunged forward. He pushed Marcus out of the line of fire, but a sharp gunshot tore through the air. Pain seared through Price's shoulder, and he collapsed to the ground, the cold concrete pressing against his skin. Marcus was at his side within seconds, applying firm pressure to the wound. "Stay with me, Price," he said, urgency evident in his voice. "The paramedics are on their way. You did good. An excellent job." The fluorescent lights of the hospital were almost blinding as Price opened his eyes. Each breath sent a wave of pain through him, and the monotonous beeping of the heart monitor filled the silence. He blinked slowly, adjusting his vision until he saw Marcus standing by the window, reading a file. "You're awake," Marcus said, closing the folder and approaching him. His tone was firm, but carried a controlled calm. We got them all. Grace and Victor, the entire network. The evidence you gathered was crucial. Your recordings exposed the entire operation. Price closed his eyes, recalling the chaos in the warehouse, the gunshot, the pain, the moment he leapt to save Marcus. He began, but his voice faltered. Did I do enough? Marcus leaned in closer. Enough for what? To make up for what I did to Kiana. To deserve forgiveness. Marcus took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. Redemption isn't something you earn with one act, Price. It's not a trophy. What you did during this operation was significant. But true redemption lies in the choices you make every day from here on out. Price turned to look out the window, seeing his reflection in the glass. The man staring back seemed different. Older, wearier, but perhaps, just perhaps, a bit wiser. I don't know if I can fix it, he whispered. That's not your decision, Marcus said firmly. All you can do is keep trying. The rest will come in time. Meanwhile, in the living room of her home, Kiana sat at the piano. The melody she played was original, each note imbued with emotion. It wasn't just music. It was a story of pain, resilience, and hope. Standing quietly in the doorway, Marcus watched, pride evident in his expression. His daughter had turned her suffering into something powerful, something capable of inspiring others. Ready for tomorrow's recital, he asked. Kiana gathered her sheet music, a faint smile on her lips. It's not just about me, she said, determination shining in her eyes. It's about showing others that strength comes from within. In that moment, father and daughter shared a silent understanding. While the world outside continued its challenges, they knew they were building something greater together, something no one could take from them. Backstage at the Academy's auditorium, Kiana adjusted her formal dress. The soft lights highlighted her silhouette and her short braids, now a declaration of strength, framed her face with elegance. This time, there were no nerves, only a calm determination that steadied her. Beyond the curtain, the audience murmured in anticipation. The auditorium was packed. Family, friends, and community members had come to see the young woman who had transformed pain into music. In the front row, Marcus sat proudly, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Further back, hidden in the shadows, was Price. He seemed smaller, almost humbled, his presence a silent surprise. When the signal was given, Kiana took a deep breath and walked to the center of the stage. The grand piano gleamed under the spotlights, waiting for her. Sitting down at the bench, Kiana adjusted her posture, closed her eyes, and began to play. The melody was an original composition, a reflection of her journey. The opening notes were soft, tentative, like the first drops of rain. But as the music progressed, it gained strength, intensity, and a powerful resilience. Each chord seemed to narrate her story, the humiliation she faced, the courage she found, and the hope that now guided her. In the audience, emotions were palpable. Some discreetly wiped away tears, while others remained still, completely absorbed by the melody. Marcus, his eyes glistening with tears, felt his heart swell with pride. In the back, Price listened intently, feeling each note strike something deep within him. When the final note echoed through the auditorium, the silence was absolute, as if everyone had held their breath. Then, a wave of applause filled the room. The standing ovation was deafening, a celebration not only of Kiana's talent, but of the story she had told. Kiana stood, bowing in gratitude. Her gaze swept across the audience until it found Price's eyes near the exit. He looked at her with a mix of admiration and regret before quietly slipping out, leaving her enveloped in the sound of applause. Outside the Academy, Price stood under the glow of a street lamp, watching the crowd emerge. Conversations filled with praise for the performance filled the air. Among the crowd, Marcus spotted him and, after a brief hesitation, motioned to Kiana. Together, they walked toward him. James, Marcus called, using Price's first name. Come here for a moment. Price took a deep breath, approaching slowly. Kiana stood beside Marcus, her dress shimmering under the soft light, her posture upright and confident. Her short braids swayed gently in the breeze. "It was incredible," Price said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your music, it spoke of strength in a way I've never understood before. It's helping me see things differently." Kiana looked at him, her gaze steady but less stern. "It's a start," she replied simply. "But keep proving it." Marcus placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "The kids at the community center have mentioned you," he said to Price. "They say you're listening now, that you're trying to understand." Price nodded, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I'm trying. The mentorship program is helping me see what I couldn't before. I want to do more, to rebuild the trust one lost." Marcus extended his hand, the gesture purposeful. "Keep at it," he said firmly. "Real change happens one day at a time." Days later, Price was at the community center, watching a group of kids paint a mural on one of the worn walls. Jamal, the teenager who had confronted him months ago, led the effort with confidence, painting the final words of a powerful phrase: "Resilience builds bridges." "Great work, Jamal," Price said as he approached. "It's more than a mural. It's a message." Jamal looked at him, a small smile forming on his face. "I didn't do it alone," he replied, "but it's good to see you around." In a corner of the center, Kiana was at the piano, playing her composition. The melody flowed through the space, filled with emotion, strength, and hope. Parents and children paused to listen, absorbing the profound meaning behind every note. As the music played, Price, Marcus, and Kiana exchanged silent glances, a mutual acknowledgement of the long journey they had undertaken. The mural, shining under the sunlight, symbolized something greater. Not just individual redemption, but a collective rebirth. If you enjoyed Kiana's story, don't miss this other one I selected for you. Click now and let yourself be inspired.